Brian, are you ready?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yep.
All right. Happy New Year, golf friends, and welcome to our inaugural V1 Virtual Summit. We are so excited to be here. We have an exciting 2 days ahead of us with an incredible lineup of guest speakers, including some of the world's best golf instructors. To see the full schedule, check out the link in the chat. You'll see the link posted here shortly. We are offering PGA MSR and LPGA CU credits to all coaches attending. If you forgot to register with your PGA or LPGA number, email marketing@v1sports.com and they will submit them for credits. You have to attend these live to receive the credits. The recording of the webinar will be available for replay in the next few days on our YouTube channel. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel through the link in the chat window. To all the folks that are joining us today, we absolutely love answering your questions. Please put them for Brian or Bryan in the chat window, and we will do our best to interrupt them and throw those questions in. Also, we have broadcasted this Zoom live to Facebook. So if we get to a certain capacity and you have trouble logging in, please jump over to Facebook and join us there. We can also monitor the Facebook window for questions. Kicking off the summit are two very, very special Bryans, Brian Finnerty and Brian Mogg. Brian Finnerty is the CEO of V1 Sports. He is our fearless leader, and our entire team adores him. Finnerty is an investor and entrepreneur at Opportunity Seed Capital, specializing in venture capital investments in sports and technology. After graduating from San Diego State with a sports marketing and finance degree, Brian was drafted by the Detroit Rockers, named Rookie of the Year, won an NPSL championship, named Series MVP, and earned a starting lineup of 4 all-star teams. Brian, thank you so much for being here. We are so happy that you are joining our team, or that you are leading our team and kicking off the virtual summit.
Oh, thank you.
Brian Mogg is a Golf Digest Top 50 teacher and Top 100 Golf Magazine teacher. Brian has academies all over the world, including Orlando, Tacoma, Toronto, Hawaii, and Korea. Brian's students have won more than 20 professional tour events, including a PGA championship and the Honda Classic. Brian Finnerty, Brian Mogg, you guys are old friends. Thank you so much for kicking off and sharing how it all started. I am going to let you take it away and enjoy the next hour. Thank you so much.
Wow. Thank you, Mandy. You're hired as my agent for sure. I'll leave that up to Mogg as second place.
I'll be right behind you with that one.
Well, as Mandy mentioned, thank you guys for joining us in this inaugural summit. COVID changed a lot of things for everybody in the golf industry, although it's been a busy place to be. We're usually in person in Orlando here at the end of the month. So this was our way of connecting both with golf pros and really for the first time live, other than on our Tuesday and Thursday, Tuesday traces and Thursday meetings, really to get a chance to meet some of the game's greatest. And I'm saying that now because I know he's going to have me later, but Brian Mogg has been a good friend of mine for, I think, almost a decade. We'll talk a little bit about that. But a little bit of housekeeping before we get going. As Mandy mentioned, if you have questions, just put them down in the comment sections, in the chat section, and we'll do our best to pick them off. I'm going to leave probably about 10, 15 minutes at the end of this, just so if you've got questions, probably mostly for Brian, but certainly I'm happy to answer them as well. We'll get them answered there, and we'll pepper in a few along the way. If you are a PGA or LPGA pro, make sure that you register with us so you can get your continuing education credits. And if you're a golfer, I guess whether you're a pro or not a golfer, I think you're going to really enjoy this next 45 to 50 minutes with Brian. I certainly have over the last decade of sharing ideas that go way outside of the game of golf. Some involve kids baseball, some involve just coaching in general and mentoring and really helping people to grow. Some parts of that is in their game and others, which I think for us was a really important way to kick off this series, which is how do you build a game plan for 21? So I think we've all heard that and we've thought about that. It comes with what's your New Year's resolution at some points in time. So we thought Brian, being obviously one of the greatest in the game, not only being as a teacher, but as Mandy mentioned, working with other tour pros, collegiate players, junior players to help them grow their game. So Brian, welcome in. I'll let everybody know we met probably about 10 years ago at a corporate event Brian was on his way to his facility in Hawaii. And at the time, I wasn't even with V1. I was with a cell phone insurance company. And we also replaced iPhones and iPads at the time. And Brian's iPad happened to be broken. And as he was getting ready to hop on a plane, said, "Can you ship one to arrive in Hawaii? Because I need it when I get there to do some V1 work." So oddly enough, 10 years later, here we sit in two different spots, but still connected. So Brian, thank you for joining us. So thrilled to have you, and really look forward to the next hour.
Likewise, it's been fun getting to know you over the last 10 years, and excited to kind of share some of the things I've learned in my background with golf.
Awesome. Well, I mean, let's start there. So let's talk about, 2021, typically a restart for most of us. And as you're looking or suggesting for golfers, let's kind of address them first. And by the way, guys, we have about half the group. We should have almost 700 people, 800 people between Facebook and this Zoom call here. About half and half are golfers and teaching pros. So we're going to try to mix in both for you. And Brian's going to be gracious enough to wear kind of two separate hats. One is a coach and one is a peer level group and to some a mentor. But for the golfers out there, they're looking to build a 2021 game plan. How are you going about doing that? Let's start with, what do you do that might give somebody a couple of nuggets of, hey, I'd like to do what Brian does?
Well, I mean, the bottom line is I want to focus on students. And when the year, which obviously was just a few weeks ago, ends, I'm thinking about my students going, all right, what did we learn this year? What worked? What didn't work? What do we need to get better in? And, with the tour players, it's easy. You pull the stats up, you can kind of look through it. There's sometimes TV evidence. There's a lot of things you can do. But, for most of us, you're working 90+% with just regular golfers. So you've got to get creative different ways to understand their game, understand what worked, what didn't work, what weaknesses there were, and try to date basically what I call just a review. Here's our review from 2020. Where did the handicap start at? Where did it finish at? Where did it fluctuate throughout the year? What parts of the game were good, were bad? Where do we need to get our improvements going in? And then that starts the dialogue down. And so I send out a lot of emails the last half of December, Happy New Year, those kind of things. But bottom line, where are you at with your game? What did you learn? Where do we need to focus on, and try and establish that dialogue so that the conversation goes? And, the awkward part, I'm sure we'll get into COVID, but COVID presented a really weird positive opportunity for golfers this past year, in that golfers flooded to the course starting in about May, and people played a lot more often than they ever did. So people actually have more, I'll say, rounds than most years played this past year. So the feedback, whether it's handicap or statistics, there's a lot of data out there you can pull from, more so than other years. And that just starts a great beginning point to have that conversation with students.
Well, I think that's a good point. And I'll insert shameless plug here for V1. V1 Game, which is sort of our, I'll say, on-course caddy, if you will, does what Brian just mentioned. So if you haven't checked out V1 Game, please go to the App Store and check it out. I just had a chance to use it yesterday. It essentially is idiot proof. It follows you around the golf course and tracks all the things Brian said, by shot, by round, by area of discipline, whatever it might be. So it does give you that baseline. And then obviously with V1 Golf as an app, you can do that through video, right? So I'll kind of get that out there. I know we're going to touch on those things a little bit later, but Brian, if you were to look at that, let's stick with the golfer. Are there three maybe, main buckets that you'd say, there's a lot of things we could look at in our golf game. Are there three buckets that you'd say, if you're really confused on where to even start, maybe just look at these three areas, and what would be the thing that you want to look at in those three areas?
Well, let's take one step even before then. One of the things about golfers is everybody learns a little bit differently. And for the coaches that are out there, please treat each golfer as a unique individual. Don't approach them with kind of a set method, I'm going to do this with everybody. Have an open mind to kind of, each person needs their buttons pushed a little bit differently. So before you even get to that point, be aware that there's got to be some variability, a little flexibility. People learn differently. People are in different, say, fitness areas. There's different things with each person. And I just strong encouragement. Let's make sure we're teaching the individual and not kind of pushing a method or pushing a one size fits all to fit everybody's plan. Because the last several weeks, with a lot of top players from the PGA Tour down to maybe low handicap golfers, I'm shocked at how varied this conversation has gone with each of them, and not gotten crazy the same to each person. So let's just start with that as the premise. So you get into three areas after that, and the golf swing is obviously one of them. I mean, you're going to have to look at the mechanics of the golf swing and find out what the patterns are, making sure you understand what core areas a golfer has as a weak link. I mean, it could be a swing path, it could be lack of body rotation, just some of the common fundamentals that are out there. That's going to dominate the conversation. But I think the challenge is for most teachers, we got to go beyond purely the mechanics. I can give you a few crazy examples just in the last week or so, as some of my tour players have gotten, one heading over to Hawaii right now and things like that. Our conversations about mechanics, but a whole lot more than that. I mean, every golfer really should take a look at, obviously the scoring component of it. Where am I at with my wedges, my chips, my putter, my bunker play, all the things that go into scoring my wedge shots? That's probably going to be your second core ingredient that's going to go into that. And then I think the last part, just as the game is changing so much, at some point, fitness, flexibility, range of motion, strength, that's going to have to be assessed as well. Because, with kind of what Bryson's done and where the game has gotten the last few years, at every level, distance and speed are becoming so much more important. So look at the three core areas of somewhat the golf swing, the scoring clubs, and fitness/speed element. Those three things have just got to be addressed. Whether you're a golfer looking at your own game, whether you're a coach looking at your students, trying to figure out how can I help this person the most.
That's a good point, Brian. And I know when you and I spent some time down in Orlando, you had mentioned that, and this is many years ago, but my vision of myself as a golfer, as an ex-pro athlete, is certain one thing, and then you look at my flexibility and you say, you might be overreaching here, no pun intended. So I think that's a good point for all of us golfers out there, that getting in front of a mirror or getting in front of video is really important, because what you think is a full shoulder turn may not be. What you think, getting in for a right-handed golfer, getting that right hip back, you may think you're doing it, but when you actually watch it like I did, it's pretty surprising that I think I have the ability to keep a straight left arm with a parallel club at the top. And reality is I can't do that without letting go of the club a little bit because I'm not flexible enough. So I think you're right, Brian. It's being able to assess that. I'm going to shift gears just a little bit and talk over to the golf pros. So, you're getting ready to start a new year. You've got multiple locations around the planet. You can't clone yourself yet, right? And so as much as our kids and spouses would want that at times. So what is it for you when you're building your game plan as a business? And we're talking to all the golf pros out there. What are you doing when you look at your business for 21 that either may be a little bit different or something you're going to accentuate that you'd say that worked really good in 20, or I've always put this as part of my plan? Are there a couple of things at the top that you'd say, yeah, for 21 as a business owner, I'm really going to try to do this?
One specific thing I'll come to, I mean, it's just, for me, it's a challenge. I've got like 5 academies and they're really not very close together. I couldn't get to Canada in 2020, not allowed. Travel's not allowed. I couldn't get to Korea, not allowed. Most of the kids were here though through the middle of spring, so I got with them most of the first third of the year. But I suspect other students with coaches are having similar issues that, living in Florida, you certainly aren't getting the travel from people saying Chicago, Boston, New York, those kind of places coming to Florida like you have in the past. So what's evolved is you've got to take care of kind of your home base of students. So for most of the teachers are out there, whatever your home base, if you're living in Atlanta, you got to take care of Atlanta or wherever city happens to be. But the flip side of that is I've never had more requests for online help. And, with V1 and with other services out there, I'm inundated just even the last 2 to 3 weeks with people going, look, I can't travel from Canada, or I'm stuck in Wisconsin or some places where it's cold. I've now put a simulator in my house, or I've now got a net in my garage. Could we start some kind of online business? And that's what's just utterly crazy, is that I know we have a lot of people from Europe and UK watching. I mean, in real time, we can share our golf swings in real time virtually right there. I mean, I'll have my tour student in Hawaii at some point later today send me some swings from the course to the range, from whatever that is, 5,000-10,000 miles away. We can look at his golf swing in virtual real time. That's now a reality. So we have to take advantage of that. And as you build relationships with students, and like in Florida, people come into Florida a few times a year, once a year, but you can keep that relationship going and help them online, wintertime and other things like that. So that would be the core answer right there, is I think online opportunities are really going up to where you can stay in touch with the student, or you can give them a lesson on Monday, and by Friday, they send you a quick note. Here's that thing we're working on. Is it better? Is it not better? Do I keep working it? I'll see you next week. those are just realities right now that I think in the right trend work for golf teachers.
Well, that's a good point. And to restate what you just said, and again, for our golf pros, I think that is so true, because the basic stuff sounds boring, but at the end of the day, it really makes sure that we do stay in business and we impact more athletes, and that's take care of home business. And if you're a local instructor, that might mean who are the guys and gals that come on a weekly or biweekly basis, and are you setting up a net in the pro shop if you're in one of the northern latitude spots, but that we're catering to them. I would say this as a piece of information for not only our golf pros, but also our golfers themselves. We have, I think we're north of 4 million golfers in our system. And so we spend a lot of time listening and talking with them, as you'd imagine. The data doesn't lie. So in any golfing year in the golf population, about 15%, 1-5, are taking a lesson from a golf pro. That leaves 85% of us that are sitting on the other side saying, I'm not so sure, or not yet, or never again. And the number one reason that we found is because of intimidation. So golfers and probably golf pros alike, there really is a nice nugget there from Bryan talking about this online lesson, because it isn't intimidating. The ability to send a lesson to somebody, whether I want to send it overseas to Richard Hughes, who works with us, right? Or I want to send it to Chicago to Jake Thurm, or I want to send it down to Orlando, or wherever Bryan is on the planet. We can do that, and it's not intimidating. So if that's something you're interested in, certainly we have the ability to do that. But I think, as Bryan mentioned, it serves both golfer and golf pro. The pros for them building their lessons and getting a bigger reach, which is always nice. You're impacting more athletes and more students. And for golfers, you have access to, again, some of the world's greatest. It doesn't just have to be in your local market. And we really encourage you that when it's time to go get some instruction, that you are ending up with someone who's a really good fit for you. Not every coach is the right fit for a student. And so your ability to kind of put your toe in the water is there and available. And I think, taking what Bryan just said, yes, it's a fundamental part of our business. We grow the base and we look for these new opportunities like online. And golfers, we're kind of looking the same, right? Look locally and then look online. You kind of have both of those chances to do that. Bryan, one of the things I think about when I'm thinking about, so, again, we're going to kind of live here in the middle between golfer and golf pro. When I think about plan, I think about the word prepare, right? Because a plan doesn't just get slid under my door one morning. I wake up and I go, hey, this is awesome. Crap. I didn't think about that. You really got to sit down and prepare. And you talked about taking some data. You talked about reviewing your business opportunities from the year before. Talk to us about preparation. And I know you've got some experiences that go even outside of golf that may prove impactful for someone who says, what does that really mean to prepare? And what could the ultimate, end byproduct be for me?
The thing that comes to mind right off the bat is, I think as a teacher first, you've got to have a set of pillars as your teaching foundation. You've got to have a set of absolutes that you go, look, these core fundamentals, absolutely, I'm going to always make sure that I focus on. And obviously the grip and all the setup components of it, maybe body rotation. There's some things I think we would all agree on. I think you've got to have that as your pillar behind what you're going to do. And I know other teachers are going to maybe lean one way, other teachers might lean another way, but I think you've got to have a base and a foundation and a pillar behind what you have that core grasp for all students. Now, once you go beyond that, one of the things I like to do is talk about the ingredients that are going to go in to make this golfer successful. And at Tiger's level, that's a different side of ingredients. At a 25 handicap, that's a different set of ingredients. You've got to get to know your student, find out, how much are they able to practice? How much are they able to work on it? How much time are they going to be able to invest? What restrictions there are maybe with their body? And you get into the ingredients then of what it's going to take. And that's the fun part for me. I've got kind of a background. I started from playing the tour and it kind of morphed into teaching. So I've kind of got this background there. And those ingredients are varied from student to student. And you've got to be able to find one. And I think I'll probably share the story I shared with you that it's had a big impact on my teaching, because as golfers and teachers, we're very wired to know what our weaknesses are. Hey, I tend to do this. And it's good. It's good to know that. But I had a really cool thing happen. I don't know what it was, maybe 15, 20 years ago. But when I was on the PGA Tour one year, 1988, I remember watching, ESPN. You couldn't help but watch Oral Hershiser have this phenomenal year. He went something like 25-3. His ERA was about 1. He threw 59 consecutive innings, and the Dodgers won the World Series. And I just remember watching how peaceful he was and how composed he was, and I just thought that was the coolest athlete I'd ever witnessed do anything. And, you know, I kept my eye on him, followed his career and all that. And I remember seeing in the paper one day, Oral Hershiser, 41 years old, retires. And I went, oh, bummer. I used to really root for that guy. Well, the weird thing, about a month later, my phone rings. Hey, Brian, it's Oral Hershiser. I just want to let you know, I live in Orlando. I just drafted your son. I'll be his coach in Little League this fall. I'm like, wow. So anyway, shorten the story, I became pretty good friends with Oral over the next few years. His son, Jordan, and my son, we kind of hung out, played a little golf. And I finally asked Oral this question. You know, how did you get where you were? He won over 200 games. I don't think he's in the Hall of Fame. He probably should be. And Oral's story was, I was a 33rd round draft pick out of Bowling Green. Not a big school, not a big name. He got to dodge a rookie ball. He looked around and went, wow, how in the world am I ever going to realize my dream of getting the major leagues? How am I ever going to get there? And he's a tall man, 6'2", but he didn't throw like, you know, back then 95. He threw like 92. It was good. But he said my fastball could not have been my best pitch. So I had to develop something that nobody else could do. And it became a sinker ball. So he threw like a 91-mile-an-hour pitch that looked like a fastball. The bottom dropped out of it, and guys hit ground balls all day long. And Oral's basic story was, I had to find something that I was the best in the world at, and then play to my strength, not always work off my weakness. And I think both as golfers and as coaches, that's a great moral right there. Too often we get so bent out of shape because you've got one little weakness and it drives us nuts. Well, go make your strength stronger. I think that's a really good, important point out there, for especially for coaches, but even for golfers that tend to be too hard on themselves. Whatever you're good at, that's great, but make it even better, make it improve, make it to the next level. So that's something I've tried to really emphasize with my students, is not just nitpick away on what their faults are, but sometimes you gotta, if they're a good wedge player, we'll make them the best wedge player in the world. They're getting decent with their chipping, we'll make them even a better chipper. And I think that's a positive story we should all remember.
Yeah, be nice. I'm waiting for Oral to ring my phone and coach my kids in baseball. That's awesome. And to all accounts, certainly a great guy, and awesome, you know, a great lesson for sure. So that thought, if we're going to stick there for a second, is a little counterintuitive, right? Because we're told, I think in society in general, we're always supposed to be sanding off the edges, right? Working on the weak spots, be this well-rounded player. And I'm going to get to a couple of questions that people have here, and I think this ties in. Sometimes it just doesn't make it fun, right? Regardless if I'm 13 or I'm 53. So when you talk about, and I'm making a leap here and you can just confirm it. I'm assuming if I'm a good wedge player and you're saying, go be a great wedge player, be the best wedge player you can be in your Saturday group or in your club championship. Are you finding that that's it? The game actually becomes more fun because I'm doing what I'm really good at versus, you know, being the best lag putter. I suck at lag putting, by the way, from 40, 50 feet. So rather than go out and grind on that for 2 hours, 3 times a week, am I going to have more fun if I go work on my wedge play? If I'm a good wedge player, is that a simple, you know, comparison there?
Well, I think one of the goals here, and you're right, as golfers, we nag and, you know, I suck in this area or whatever. I think if you make it a resolve to at least be average in the area you're weak in, be average. I think that's a legitimate goal. Doesn't mean you're going to hit it, you know, 300 yards like Bryson, but, you know, if you can hit it 240 and be average for wherever your age and handicap is, there's nothing wrong with being average. But the moral, I think, where you're going with this here is maybe you should go work on your 3 to 6 foot putts, so that even if you don't hit a fantastic first putt, at least you know what, hey, didn't get as close as I wanted, but I know I'm great from 4 or 5 feet. I'll knock it in. You might have more fun putting 4 or 5 footers around the hole than you will 2 hours spent lag putting, getting frustrated. So I think you can kind of weave a little bit with that one and focus on a blend of what you need to work on, not just one component.
Well, I'm going to be booking a plane ticket COVID after to come see you, because that's what you just said there is so important, right? Just the way you said that, go work on your 4 to 6 footers, because that's about where they end up, by the way, my lag putts, which are more fun. So I think that's a good point, you know, and for golf pros, hopefully you can take that away, that it isn't, again, one methodology, and there are thousands out there for sure. But I always say, not only look at somebody's results in terms of, well, how many tour players did they get, or how many tour player wins did their guys get, or in Brian's case, actually playing on the tour. But you know, I often ask a coach when we get to see them, what's the turnover like in your students, right? How good do you do in retention? And so for you golfers out there that have not yet seen a pro, or you feel like, oh, I'm definitely never going back to a pro, I'd say keep your toe in the water on this one. And that can be a good question, because the coaches that keep their students, and I know Bryan does, and I know many of them do, it's for that word. And it sounds simple, fun, but Brian's not going to have me grinding on 50, 60-foot putts until I say, forget it. I just don't want to be out here again. Let's create some fun games around the 4 to 6 footers so that we know actually the pressure comes off the 50 footer and gets onto that. So I won't go too long on that, but I think that's a great point, Brian. If I go earlier in the life cycle of a golfer, so I'll say this from a pro, it's one of the questions from Sean. A little bit of a two-parter. So how do you evaluate in the junior golfer? And Sean, by the way, Jake Thurm, I think in the very next session is going to talk specifically about junior golfers, but Brian, I know you work with a lot of them as well. How do you evaluate a junior golfer kind of in that swing mechanics portion? And the question is, how do you keep it fun so that being on the range or being on the short game area doesn't become a chore? So what is it that you evaluate, and then how do you put them? You may have kind of started to answer that, but how do you put them in that environment where they say, awesome, I see what I need to do, and you've identified that for me, but then what do I go do to make sure it's fun?
Well, the first thing I do, and I'd encourage the coaches out here to follow this example, but for those of you who have young kids out there and now you've seen them grow up, dumb example here, but when your child's really young, you kind of project what they might look like when they become a teenager or early 20s. And then you watch them grow up, you watch that change take place. But even when they were 2, 3, 4 years old, you can almost project what they're going to look like as a young person. That's what I do with the golf swing. So when you get a young golfer come in, maybe they've got tons of room to grow, et cetera, but I get a visual picture in my head of going, I think the person can swing their best doing this. And even though I'm looking at the student swing or looking at, the V1 picture of their swinging, I'm working off that picture of where I think they end up at. So I'm always working to make the picture look like what I think the real picture should look like. So when you've got juniors in there, you don't want to tie them up with too many thoughts. You don't want to tie them up in too many positions. You kind of want to work towards this big picture. If this is where I think they can actually get to, and this is how they'll play their best golf. And then you try and convey that in the process to mom and dad, to the junior, and then let them kind of grow towards that process. The other thing with almost every junior golfer I do, at some point, even if it's just an hour lesson, at some point, time out, stop, we're going to do this game. And you might set a bucket up 10 yards away, and maybe it's a brother, sister, maybe I jump in. All right, first one to chip 3 in the bucket wins. Or, we're going to set our TrackMan, our Mevos up. All right, we're going to make a swing and see who can get the best club head speed in 3 swings. Just do something to divert, excessive attention to the mechanics of it. You don't want kids to burn out. If they're superstar at 12, who really cares? That's not really what the ultimate goal is. So you've always got to divert and make something change. And what I've always tried to do is make it golf course applicable. I mean, chipping a ball in a bucket, that's no different than a golf course where you're trying to chip and land it on a spot. So you pull them back a little bit and make some component of it fun.
Well, I think we're hearing that recurring theme, right? Just the changing the scenery a little bit. And I think by the newness of doing that, right, whether it's chipping it in a bucket or flopping it over a bunker or the things you would see on a golf course, make it fun, right? And I like that. And all the way out to swing as hard as you can, and let's see if we can get one on the fairway in 3 swings. Is fun, right? That's certainly relevant today in what we're seeing, not just with Bryson, but a host of other guys and gals who are really starting to work on the speed of their swing, right? So that can make it fun. Going to switch gears a little bit. Another question we're going to pepper in, and maybe you can do this in percentages, not necessarily has to be dollar amounts, but you as a top 50 teacher, top 10 teacher in most places, you've got a rate that you would charge for me, Brian Finnerty, come stand on the range with you and get an hour of your time. How does that vary to if I'm sending you an online request and for you to do an online lesson for me? Is it 50% of your regular hourly rate? Is it 100% of that hourly rate? Do you have a certain breakdown? That was one of the questions. How do you set for those guys, those teaching pros that are new in that online world? And I know this is capitalism 101, right? You kind of have to figure out what the market is, but do you have a somewhat of a formula that you use?
I do. I think I'd take it one step back though. And what's your time worth? And how long is it going to take you to analyze this online video? So to make it simple, if your time's worth $100 an hour and it's going to take you 30 minutes to do it, there's 50%. If it's going to take you 10 or 15 minutes, well, now you're into about 25% or so. So I think it's a little more of a time driven component because as golf coaches, I mean, we just basically get paid for our knowledge of how much time that takes. So I'm probably in the 25-30% range for an hourly golf lesson versus what it would do for an online component of it. But I think bottom line is, I've always had the attitude that I want a relationship with a student. I mean, I've been doing this 27 years, and the best part of it is I've got so many friends all over the world now. And yeah, it's a golf business and there's money exchanged, but I've got friends all over the world, and I want to keep those friends, and I want to make more new friends. And that's more important to me than the dollar amount, because when you get a golfer and you help them, there's a bond that's created, and I want to keep that golfer being helped for his whole life. So I'm not going to err too high on making the money component of it as much as I'm going to build that friendship up and become true friends with that person, to a degree that you still have to run a business as well.
Yeah. Well, and that's how we started, right? I mean, honestly, you were very kind and gracious with your time at an event we were at, and 10 years later, we're here. And I'd say in large part because you were not only kind with your time, you truly cared about me getting better as a golfer, and that was true. And I'd say for the business owners, golf pros out there, the old adage, the money will follow your passion. Having spent time around Bryan for all these years, I can tell you, whether I've been on a short trip to Orlando and he scoots me out on the golf course in between groups or sets me up on a range, it wasn't about what could I charge and I'd be willing to pay. It was more about how do we keep that relationship. And so I think that's a really important component, because it gets overused in business, I think, in general, that if you just follow your passion. But truly the takeaway there to me is make sure you're taking care of your students. You got to make your time worth it for sure, but that's probably not the place that you're going to overly charge. And I'd say for you golfers out there, again, whether you're with a pro now and want to engage more online with that pro, or maybe start exploring this, from what you just heard from Bryan, the impact can be pretty close to that in-person environment. There's nothing that will ever replace, I think, standing there and watching somebody physically in the same space as you. But it is a less expensive way to at least try a few things, right? And try maybe a different pro. Or Bryan's talked about this a lot, having a team of pros. Maybe you've got someone that really helps you out pounding that driver, and you've got somebody else that's helping you out with 4 to 6 foot putts, right? I don't think any pro would tell you they'd be adverse to having been part of a team. They're open to doing all things. So I think that's a good point, Bryan. That really speaks to that. I'm going to answer this other question for Sean, because it kind of fits in that mold. What tools do we need as golf pros to kind of do this, to go online? I'd say, again, selfishly speaking, V1 is an inclusive system, meaning you can shoot video with a phone, an iPad, or with a 5-camera system in a bay, which some of our instructors do. You can capture all that video, you can deliver it to a golfer. And from the golfer's perspective, they can capture it literally with an iPhone through the V1 app. And if I captured my swing this afternoon, if I sent it to Bryan, he gets a notification. Hey, Brian, Finnerty just sent you a request for a lesson. Bryan does it, hits send, and it comes right back to me. So, again, there are plenty of other ways to do that. Some of them just using the cameras on your phones and iPads, but in the V1 system, there's no Dropbox. There's no other ancillary pieces to connect to. It all pretty seamlessly works. So I think that is a simple way to go.
Let me throw one more plug. Let me throw one more V1 plug. One of the things I extra enjoy about V1 is, as teachers, we should be accountable. I mean, guy comes in for a lesson, he pays you some money, and in theory, you fix his slice. But what I like about V1 is, let's just say the golfer's taking it outside with his face open. He's probably going to slice. 30, 40 minutes later, I can take another video and I can show him a comparison of that club being, say, outside and open, and now it's more back slightly inside and square. And you've got accountability that says, hey, look, here's where you were at 10:03. It's 10:44 now. Look where you now are at. And I love that component of V1 that I use that. I've already used it twice this morning teaching and showing 2 different students. Here's where you started. Here's where you're now at. And there's accountability. There's confidence. It goes, hey, the teacher knows what he's doing. The student says, hey, I know I'm working on the right stuff. So I think that's a fantastic component of V1.
Yeah, and I'll add this in and then move on. One of the things, Bryan, you work with me, again, I want to say this was 10 years ago. I was really struggling getting out of a bunker, and you gave me some really nice tips. And then we videotaped, we recorded that swing, and we call it swing banking at V1. I know you use that term a lot, especially with the golf pros. Like, what does it look like when you're doing it really good? And that was helpful for me, because I went back to some bad habits the minute I got back to Michigan, and it was nice to pull up a swing bank and
Yep.
say, oh, that's right. Okay, that's what the face and the back of my hand, which is what we're focusing on, should look like, both at the back part of the swing and certainly at impact. So I think that was, that was another component that made it really nice. Just a note, one of your students up in Canada said, and I think this goes good for pros and for athletes alike, is that Bryan does a great job of following up with us as students. And so I think for golf pros, again, the basics can seem boring, but when we do them right, they have such great impact. Bryan mentioned he sends a note to everybody really through the second half of the month of December, just checking in, how are you doing? I can tell you that's not done on mail merge and sort of a blast email, because that component is really important to him. I do know that personally. So for the golf pros out there, that's an important part, making sure you're following up. How's it going? How are you doing, right? Keeping that touch point, sort of playing doctor, if you will. Like, we had a prescription going for you. How's it working out? And I know that, Bryan, you and I have talked a lot about that. That's an important piece, not just from your game perspective, but how are you feeling about that game? And are you encouraged to go play more, or are you really frustrated? Because that probably means we got to tweak your game plan, right? Which is our topic this week. So that's a good point, making sure we follow up. And again, for golfers, if you're not getting that, either start asking for it or start looking, right? Because that really is part of what makes us better players out on the golf course, is someone who cares about our constant health, both mentally and physically on the course itself. So I think that's an important part. Bryan, I'm going to skip back here. We'll let the questions kind of keep rolling in. You and I were joking around about kind of this work from home mentality, right? We've all been forced into it to some degree or another, thanks to COVID. So work from home tends to feel like, oh gosh, well, I was working in an office and I got sent home to work on my computer. But you and I were saying, whether I'm a golf pro or really as a golfer, what work from home has changed into from your perspective. So maybe talk a little bit about, WFH and what that means for you, both as a teacher and what you'd say for the students out there.
Well, it's kind of weird, obviously, because I don't know what the percentage is. So many more people are literally working from home. And I think that allowed for a lot more golf last year for spring, summer, and fall. All throughout the US, you saw more golfers get out, and golf course rounds were crazy up and all that. But what it really means is golfers around the house are getting excited to play golf. And if you're just in your house, you've got, let's say, kitchen tile, or you've got some kind of lines on your rug or something. Those are fantastic teaching moments. You can check your ball position. You can check your alignment. You can check if you're turning, pivoting behind the ball. You've possibly got mirrors in the bathroom, maybe out in the garage. You can get out in those pieces and get additional feedback from things. So being around the house, if you're smart, you can be watching a show on TV and working on your grip, on, off, making sure it's kind of in your fingers, your V's are in the right spot. You can be doing a lot of reinforced good fundamentals around the house in spite of COVID, or in spite of the fact that you're not in the office. You actually can have a club in your hands, hopefully a little more conveniently, hopefully safely as well, but you can do some things very, very quick and easy. I've gone out in my backyard and chipped over bushes and just done some oddball things I used to do as a kid, where you play little games around the edge of your house and hope you don't break windows and things, but hit little shots. You're bored almost. You got to get outside. You got to have something to do. And for those who are up north, when the weather turns a little bit nicer, jump outside and chip over the snowman if you need to, but have a few things where the club's just in your hands. There's no reason you can't get a little better. I mean, one of the goals in golf, this is a great goal. If you can get 1% better than you were yesterday, you're going to be pretty good in a month or two or 3 or 4. So what are you going to do today to be 1% better than yesterday?
Well, that's a good point, that knowing your baseline, we kind of opened up there, right? Kind of assess where you're at before you kind of build your plan. So if you know where you're at, that allows you to get those 1%, 2%, 5% gains, whatever that might be. And as you and I talked about, Bryan, it's, and I'd say this for the group, know this about us, definitely know this about Bryan, that you'll get to know him more, hopefully. 1% doesn't mean I take my handicap from a number down 1%. Bryan will be the first one to tell you that 1% is really about enjoyment. And it's about your way to get around a golf course. In some degrees, it is about, is my score coming down? Certainly that's going to matter at some point in time. But as you get 1% better and you're charting those things, it's in those things you're enjoying having fun doing, right? And so that's, I think, really important part of that. Again, guys, some questions I'm going to get to right away. Others I'll kind of end here at the end. So Bryan, on the work from home side, let's take that as a pro. I know you talked about online. Certainly that's a way for us to connect to our students. Are there any things that you're doing as a pro differently in kind of the work from home model, other than just developing online lessons, right? Or even chipping balls over hedges. I think you shot a video doing that, by the way.
Yes, I did.
Are there other things that you do that you'd say, hey, this kind of changed for me in the work from home environment that either makes me a better business owner or makes me a better golf teacher?
Probably more so on the coach side of things, business side of things, in that I kind of redid my office in the standpoint of I keep notes on all my students, keep a card, and I've done a much better job of both filing those notes and students and cards and then load them into my computer so they're in files. So with all my academies and all the friends I've made over the world, I've got my files now divided up to where if I'm going to Korea, if I'm going to Toronto, where I've got different students, I can more easily access them. So being at home, especially last spring, where there was kind of pretty good gap when golf got shut down before we started back up, that was a really good time to purge things in the office, get the computer cleaned up, do some of the things that are foundationally. So I've got more of a kind of a data list of students, and it makes it way easier to send things out. And then, as you just alluded to, I started doing videos. I mean, it's something I think we all can reach out to our students, that all you need is an iPhone, and you can either talk, you can demonstrate, you can hit some shots, you can do a drill. There's so many things you can do. If you've only got 10 students, well, even if it's a group email, group text to those 10 people, hey, here's a drill that really be good if you did it while you're home over the weekend or watching a ball game this weekend. Make sure you get up 2 times during the game and use a mirror and check these 2 keys, whatever it is. I've just had more fun making videos for students, and geez, social media and other corporate people have really followed me a lot, and opportunities have come out of making those videos.
That's a great point. And what I love about it is it does transition. We're clearly talking to a teaching pro. But for the golfers out there, I continue to hear you say foundation, a couple of minutes a day, get in front of a mirror. It's just those little things, getting the familiarity with having the club and finding what works, right? And so I love the fact that it kind of bounces back and forth between those two. I'll hit a pause button here as we get ready to kind of come into Q&A in the next 4 or 5 minutes. If you've got questions, kind of just keep loading them in the chat. We'll pick them off. And hopefully, we'll get them all in before 10 o'clock. I know we've already got a lesson, a series of them kind of going over here. The 3 components of V1, I kind of glazed over these in the beginning. So you've got the V1 Pro side, right? V1 Pro, which is in our studio, V1 Pro Mobile. I know Brian's very familiar with that because we work a lot with him on that. Being able to use the phone or the iPad, especially as portable as he is and how much traveling. So you've got V1 Pro and V1 Pro Mobile. That's for our teachers out there. And then for the students, you've got V1 Golf, which is the ability to capture your swing and send it to a pro, or to look at it yourself, do a little DIY, right? And then you can also compare your swing to other pro players, LPGA and PGA. You can compare your swing to other guys and gals you play with, and you compare your swing to your swing, which is really nice. And then we get the V1 Game app, which is, I talked about that earlier, being able to kind of track your shots around the golf course. And the last component that really ties those things together is V1 Coach. So with V1 Coach, that's what your pro would have on their iPad or in their computer system. And every round that I play, if Brian was my teacher full-time or not, Brian might say, hey, give me your last 5 rounds. And I would just select Brian as my coach. And you could have multiple coaches. And I'd send Brian my last 5 rounds from wherever I played in the world, if I was planning on being in Orlando in 2 weeks from now. And Brian could literally see shot by shot where I was around the golf course, and he could build a game plan for me before I even get down there. And one of the really nice things about that is it doesn't take what I remember as being my bad things, because I'm probably going to remember that damn out of bounds I hit in the only place you can hit it on Torrey South. Really, my driver wasn't the problem. He's going to say, I think it was really your 9 and 8 iron from kind of that 150 to 160 range that caused us the most trouble. So we're going to work there based on the data, right? And that's one thing that we spend a lot of time talking about is, in order to build a good foundation, you have to have some data, whether that's a baseline, like Brian talked about in the beginning, know where you are to start. And then certainly, how are you getting better? Some of that shows up in video, and then others of that does show up actually kind of in the app and in the statistics. So I think that gives everybody a rounded kind of approach to where you might fit in the system itself. Brian, are there any other stats, or I'll say data collection points? You talked about CRM, getting all the notes in there. Are there any other things you use to kind of make sure that you've got the full picture of the student that you need?
Well, the simple answer is with PGA Tour, the stats are almost too in depth. So when I've got tour students, Corn Ferry students, I mean, good grief, they do the work for you, and it's pretty easy to dissect, where your weaknesses are, because you can go way beyond, how many fairways do they hit or how many putts do they have. They can really break it down. Um, I'll do a little preachy thing here. One of the things I really look at with students is how they play the par threes, the fours, and the fives. Because one of the interesting data points from the tour is PGA Tour, at least, and probably the girls are the same, but you dominate the par fives. Usually it plays to about a 4.6. You play the par fours fractionally under 4.0, but the par threes play 3.15. So when you start talking the average amateur golfer makes a 3 on a par 3. You pick up ground against a PGA Tour or probably LPGA player. So you may not be able to hit 3 consecutive shots in a par 5 and knock it in regulation, but all you got to do is one time, one shot, whether it's with an 8-iron or a hybrid on a par 3, knock it in the middle of the green and 2-putt, and at least in theory, you've picked up ground on the PGA Tour. So for students as well as just golfers out there, let's make 2021 where you play your par 3s better. You play the par 3s with, say 4 3s on the card. You are picking up a lot of ground against good players, and that can shave multiple shots off your round. And I just don't think that one stat is focused in on enough.
Oh, that's a great point. And right, it's again, as a golfer, I can take away, go out to my next practice session, get on the range and think about what are the 4 par 3s I'm going to play in my next round, whether it's at my local club or wherever I'm going to end up next. If it's 150, 171, 180, and 145, I could spend time just working on that. I think that's fantastic.
But you see, but most golfers automatically go at the flag. I mean, you could be at 17 at TPC with the wedge that it kind of normally is now, or move the tee back 100 yards and guys are hitting 3-iron. Intuitively, you're just going to go at the flag, and that's the mistake. So the word I like to use is play a really aggressive shot to a conservative pin.
So give me a little more detail on that, right? I'm
playing hypothetically, 17th hole TPC. I think we all know the hole, and let's say it's the Sunday pin, the back right pin. Most of the guys are hitting like a 9-iron. Well, you would play a really aggressive 9-iron to 30 feet left of the flag. You'd take a positive shot and mentally move that flag over 20 to 40 feet left, and then you play a really aggressive shot instead of a wishy-washy kind of let me fake like I'm aiming it to the left and then push it the hole, which is what most golfers end up doing. And you short-sighted or you hit a bad swing, and the penalties, at least on that hole, are severe. So make 4 really aggressive swings to a conservative pin and see if you can make 4 3s, and virtually every golfer at every level will pick up ground.
Wow. All right. Well, that almost is a closing statement, but we're not. We got 10 more minutes. So we're going to keep going here. Carly had asked, and I think I can answer this one, is there a specific program used to keep files on students? All of that is in V1 Pro. So there's a place to literally have right, left hand. You can bank their swings between all the different clubs, a huge note section. So as Brian talked about, having continuous notes, you can text or email them right from V1 Pro. There's certainly a way to do that. And I'm sure there's a number of things, including, Notepad on your iPhone, if you wanted to go that simplistic. But in the vein of being with V1, that is all in V1 Pro, whether it's V1 Pro or V1 Mobile. And so, yeah, Brian might be making notes there in Orlando, but if and when the time comes when he can go to Korea, he doesn't have to download that database. Literally just opens up V1 Pro Mobile and all the notes of every student. And he can say, well, I want to just see the students that are in Seoul, Korea. Perfect. All those will come up. So there's plenty of different ways to do that. Staying in the line of this question for you, Brian. What's the one thing you would tell an instructor restarting his teaching career after 20 years? So if you can maybe put yourself, go back a couple of decades or fast forward now and you've had the time off and you're just sitting in your Bahama house doing some fishing off the porch and you come back to it 20 years later, what's the one thing you'd tell a teacher who's coming back to it and says, I really want to get back into teaching?
Well, 2 things jump to mind. Number one, the fundamentals of golf haven't changed going back to whatever, pre-Bobby Jones era. So the fundamentals where you're always going to want to fall back to and make sure that you have your belief system on what those base fundamentals are. And it starts with grip and setup and all that. So make sure that that part is checked off. The second part would be, what's changed in the last 20, 25 years? And the biggest answer to that is equipment. And the golf ball goes so much further. The heads are so much bigger. So you're going to have to get updated on what the equipment does, because with longer, lighter golf clubs and speed being a bigger component of it, while the fundamentals not necessarily haven't changed radically in the last 100 years, the technique and what students have to do has changed a lot. I mean, we're a lot less, say, lateral with our leg action. We're much more ground force driven. Your body's got to do a little bit more, say, rotation going back. I mean, at the higher levels, your club face almost tends to be a little more closed for a good player these days. So you've kind of maybe got to get updated on what some of the newer trends are, but don't get too far away basically from core fundamentals and what your belief system is and what the core basics that every golfer's got to be doing.
So again, stick to the basics, right? And then do them really well and then expand from there.
Yeah.
So I think that's key. Sticking in the lessons kind of vein here, we got a question, can you provide a quick overview of how you run an online lesson with V1? I know you and I have talked about it's got to be short, right? At the end, what I get back as a student is probably somewhere between 3 and 5 minutes tops. But is there something, can you kind of go through, these are the things I do to run a quick, if I sent you a swing, how you'd end up, reviewing it and send it back to me?
I mean, well, the simple is with V1, it's such a clear system that you can look at view, you can draw lines on it, you can put circles on head, you can check so many different positions. So you provide some kind of an analysis of that swing and then highlighting it, stopping it, using the audio portion where you can point out various flaws within what you're seeing. The challenge is you want to point out enough stuff, but sometimes as a teacher, you're better only given 2 of the 10 things they need to work on. So from an online standpoint, I would encourage other teachers out there, don't throw them the kitchen sink in that first lesson. Have that vision of where you want that student to end up, even if they live 10,000 miles away. Get to know them just a little bit and find out what they can do, what they can learn, how much they want to be able to process, and then use the technology V1 offers, and then draw out kind of the first step of a plan, whether that's, drawing the circles and things like that. And then let that be the first step in the process, hopefully, of a relationship that you can add to and not cram it down their throat and hope, if Bill Gates invited us out to Microsoft and tried to give us a 30 to 60 minute lesson on how to do a computer, most of us couldn't follow what he's doing. So let's make it so that we could understand it kind of in the opposite vein of that.
Well, and I'll give you guys a real life example of that, to Brian's point, keep it simple and figure out where you're going to start and build a relationship. My first lesson with Brian, which was at, I want to say maybe Hamilton Farm, but I have to remember where we were exactly. Mm-hmm. It was just that my goal, and this, I know this sounds ugly simple, was to get the ball out of a bunker onto the putting surface. And this was no small putting surface. So Brian's thing was, and it was personalized. Hey, Brian, widen that stance a little bit. This is Brian Mogg, obviously, widen your stance a little bit. Here's 2 or 3 tips and drills that I'd like you to work on when we're not together. And at the end, he wrapped it up with, you're on the right track, and this is the start for us, right? So I think if you look at very simply, I just broke it down into about 7 seconds, but the whole thing was maybe 90 seconds, 2 minutes tops. And it was one simple objective to get me to hit the ball onto a space where I could clearly tell there was more meat on the bone. It just wasn't right then, but I had a lot of success with that. And I think that started some of our journey, which was great, right? So I think to Brian's point, intro, something simple to start that portion. And then we call it an extra, right? The kind of exit that is personalized. Hey, Brian, thanks. Good luck. Keep it up. You're doing a great job. Those things are pretty important. Another question here. So Brian, do you have an annual plan with your students? And if so, kind of how do you do that? And again, I know we got 5 minutes left here. So is there just a quick down and dirty, if you have an annual plan, how do you do that?
Is that annual financially or just annual? Is that reference?
Like if I was going to sign up with you, if I was going to sign up with you for a year, whether that's instruction, you're working with me on a month-to-month basis, do you do it that way or do we do it a la carte? I think that's kind of the question.
I do not have an annual plan. I mean, I think that would have to get into, I wouldn't be opposed to it. I've done it with tour players. I mean, tour players, you're around them 12 months, 24/7. You're seeing them on a consistent basis. You're extra time on phones and emails and videos type stuff. I think it's fine. You got to be a little careful that the expectation game is met, both with the student thinking he's probably got 24/7 access and the teacher thinking it's probably not going to be that time commitment, and you better make sure that the communication is clear on that, because I did a little of that early in my teaching career, and it was nice at first because it's kind of like some nice money early in January when it comes in, but you also have to balance how much the expectation game of how much access does the student get unlimited access to you for that price. And, you really need to charge more if that's what it means to you.
Well, I think that's a good point. And Brian, we didn't have time to cover this, but one of the things about building a plan that you and I talked about ahead of time was really being intentional, right? I think there's a lot of power in that word, whether as a coach being intentional about sussing out what the student needs and spending time, or as a player being intentional about what do you want to go from good to great at. And in the business, and I can tell you, whether it's running V1, whether you're running your academies around the globe, I think that brings up a very good point. Whatever your pricing plan is going to be, whatever you're going to charge your students, think it through all the way to the end. Be intentional about 365 days from now. What will the impact of that offer be? Because so many of us go, well, I'm in Michigan and it's cold. I would really like to have a little extra revenue by selling these annual plans. But come July, when I'm working 60, 70 hours a week and not seeing my kids, I may have overbuilt the expectation. So I think that's a really good heads up to say, be intentional about what you expect the outcome to be. And I think that's a takeaway for all of us, whether we're working in business or on our golf games. I know for 2021, kind of being intentional is a really, really important part of that. We're coming up here on time, Brian. I want to make sure that, gosh, I think we're almost at 1,000 people here between the two platforms. So whether I'm a golf pro or I'm a golfer, let's start with the golf pros first. I can speak for many of us, many of them, this idea of having you as a voice for an hour has been fantastic. But is there a way that they can either find some instruction video from you or watch some other tips and drills that you do? How would they find you? How do they get in contact with you?
I mean, my email's Bryan@moggacademy.com. Bryan with an I. That's pretty easy. Website's moggacademy.com. I'm in social media. I'm putting up a video every day on Twitter and Instagram @moggacademy. Pretty simple and basic right there. I try to be approachable and make students aware of what's going on. That'd be the quick, easy answer.
That's what we're looking for, quick and easy. So Kelly, put that in the chat. If you're joining us on Zoom, if you're in Facebook, we'll post it on our site, but it is Bryan@moggacademy.com. Easiest way to reach him there. And, I will leave you with this. One of the things that I've just been so excited to see over this last decade with Bryan is some of the content and videos that he shot when he didn't think he needed them. I'll speak for him on that. And just this idea of always being something fresh and new. Both Bryan and I certainly have enough gray hair to tell plenty of stories. We're not the 20-something-year-olds getting into this business, but Bryan is constantly shooting content, talking to other pros, talking to players, working with juniors. I mean, the gamut is pretty wide. And I would say for you golf pros out there, I think that's a really good lesson to take, that if you have the opportunity to shoot some video and just archive some content, do it now. You never know when you're going to need it. Bryan will definitely attest to that. And there are new and better ways. And so as a player, if you're looking to get in touch with Bryan, I can't highly suggest it enough. And thankfully, there are over 20,000 golf pros around the globe that are willing to work with you. So we thank you for joining at V1. If you want to reach Bryan, Bryan@moggacademy.com. It's in your notes section. Any questions that we didn't get to, my apologies. We were coming up on time and want to be respectful to Bryan's time and your time. We've got seminars throughout the day today and again tomorrow that range from teaching young golfers coming up next with Jake Thurm to working with V1 Pro and building a better business coming up here later in the day. So thank you to everybody. Really appreciate it. Bryan, always great spending time with you. Thanks, and enjoy the sunshine down in Florida.
All right. Thanks, Bryan. Thanks so much for your help.
All right. Thank you.